Good evening and welcome to Watchman on the Wall. Tonight we have a special program for you because we are actually interviewing Errol, who you know as the executive producer of the show. But Errol is also the founder and director of Family Policy Institute, which is an organization defending the family and the freedoms that we as Christians know to be true. So Errol, welcome to your own show.
Good to be with you, Jackie, and good to be welcome to my own show for the first time.
I know, it's great to be chatting to you, and you've recently come back from Washington on a trip for Family Policy Institute. Why don't you tell the viewers at home a little bit more about FPI and also your trip and why you were there?
Yeah, this trip to Washington, D.C., Arlene and I made in June. It's important because when God called us to establish the Ministry of Family Policy Institute in 2007, I went to Washington, Arlene and I, and my youngest son, Jared. We lived there for 6 months, and I trained with an organization called Family Research Council. Now, Family Research Council is a pro-family public policy educational organization that advances a family-centered philosophy of life in America, helping churches to understand the threats against marriage and family and what they can do about it. So we were very pleased to be part of this organization, to learn as much as I did. But in that time in Washington, the vision for Family Policy Institute was crystallized. I knew God wanted me to do something, to start a ministry in South Africa, to defend the family and to promote righteousness in this nation, but didn't quite have all the details. So it was in this time in Washington, D.C. that God began to unfold his plan. And so when we came back in 2007, we established Family Policy Institute, got our first offices outside the gates of Parliament, and went operational in July 7, 2008. And we've been fighting the battles. We've been working with churches. We've been working in the media, getting the message out that marriage and family are vital institutions that no nation can do without.
Yes.
And if we look at the breakdown of families and the chaos that results from family breakdown, I think everybody should be aware that we need to defend and fight for these institutions because it benefits all of society. So 7 years later, in June, I get invited to Washington again by the International Organization for Marriage. And what they had there was the Global Forum on Marriage, which involved, there were about, I think, 47 nations represented there. And basically, the discussions centered around the global attack on marriage as an institution. And many of our viewers must be aware by just watching the news media that there is huge attempts to redefine marriage and to redefine the family. So the redefinition of these institutions will obviously render it inconsequential in society.
Yeah.
But of course,
and detrimental too.
Exactly. But marriage and family is institutions given by God for a very, very critical purpose, and that's for supporting and strengthening society. And once you take those institutions out, or you redefine it, or tamper with it, you cause society great harm.
Yeah.
And so this meeting was a global gathering, an alliance of pro-family, pro-marriage organizations coming together with the idea of working together. Because it's a global attack, or a global threat, we need to work locally, but think globally, work with other organizations doing good work.
So, Errol, I've got a couple of questions for you. Let's start first of all. I'm quite curious to know, with the nations represented, would you say the bulk of them were first world countries, westernized? Were there any from the Middle East, representatives maybe? You know, I'm quite interested to know the makeup of those who were there. Mostly
first world organizations, United States of America, where there's a huge civil war of values currently taking place. And all focused on marriage and family. So United States of America, many European nations, Eastern European nations as well. Mexico was there, Philippines was there, France, Italy, all of those nations were there. However, there were some African nations as well. So I represented South Africa. There was a guy from Malawi, a woman from Nigeria. But a number of the people that wanted to be there from various nations in the world couldn't be there because a whole host of issues. So we can't say that the Global Forum of Marriage, just represented 47 nations. If you factor in all the nations or the people that couldn't make it at that particular time, there was well over 100 nations represented there. You get these people standing up and they're as passionate about these institutions as you are. You think, well, it's only our fight here in South Africa or maybe in the United States of America. No, it isn't. It's worldwide. There are people fighting for marriage to protect these institutions all over the world, including very liberal nations.
Yes.
For example, in France, which is a liberal nation, in France, over 1 million people took to the streets to march for marriage between a man and a woman.
Now, I know, that was quite a shock, actually.
It was, and we met the people that were behind that organized it. They were at the Global Forum of Marriage. So anyway, we were there, and we are now part of this alliance. Family Policy Institute is part of this global alliance for marriage.
Yes.
And then we also met with the leadership of the World Congress of Families. Now, the World Congress of Families, of which Family Policy Institute is already a partner member, is the largest global network of pro-family organizations in the world. Okay, anybody fighting for family is part of the World Congress of Families. So it's a significant, powerful organization. And so there's these two organizations, International Organization for Marriage and the Global Family Forum, Global Congress on Family, that God has connected us with, I believe, strategically for where God is taking us as an organization.
Right, so now, Errol, tell me, I like to keep things simple here. So from when you went over 7 years ago and you were called by God to pioneer Family Policy Institute, how have you seen the shift in values in the country here, locally, first of all, and just the role that your organizations had to play? Has there been quite a dramatic shift in 7 years?
I think so, because when we went to America, it wasn't, I couldn't even understand what we would be doing. But as the ministry unfolded, I began to see the increase of the attacks against marriage and family. We saw that here in South Africa. We see that internationally, and how God has positioned us to be a voice, to work with churches all over this country, to work in the media, to put the message out there that marriage is between a man and a woman, and there's a very good reason for that. It's not to discriminate against anybody, but it's to protect society. And so I can see God's timing in establishing this ministry. But now 7 years later, the battle is a lot more fierce. It's a lot more fierce worldwide. People are fighting on the front lines of the battlefield for just keeping and retaining the sanctity of marriage and family. There are people losing their jobs. There are people whose lives have been destroyed by activists all over the world for simply standing up for these institutions. So the battle is fierce. And so 7 years later, I get called back to Washington, D.C., and while we're there, I visit with a church that my wife and I were part of while we lived in Washington, D.C. in 2007, Grace Covenant Church. Wonderful pastoral couple called Pastor Donnell and Marianne Jones. And we went back, we surprised them. They didn't know we were in Washington. And when we walked into the church, they were busy praying before the church. They were in this whole prayer session, interceding. And we walked in and surprised everybody, and they welcomed us and continued to pray. And they were right in the middle of just praying, everybody praying, and they continued to pray, and we could feel the presence of God when we walked in there. And then Pastor Donnell just turned to Arlene and I, and he said, "Lift up your hands," and he prophesied.
Okay, so tell me, what did he prophesy?
So, the timing was incredible that we walk into this time of intense prayer. It's almost like God took us there because we got there earlier than we should have. So we go in there, and he turns around and he says, now, he didn't know. I didn't speak to him yet. He didn't know that we were there, why we were there. He had no idea. So we walk in, he prays, he turns, and he says to us, God is going to reposition you. Your ministry, God is going to multiply, and God is going to use it in greater measure. There's new things coming. Now, when he said that, when he said there's new things coming, my eyes opened because it was closed. because the prophecy God gave us at the beginning of this year, 2014, was, I'm going to do new and greater things through this ministry. And it comes from Isaiah chapter 43, verse 18 and 19. See, I'm doing a new thing. Can you not perceive it? I'm going to forget about the former things.
Yeah.
I'll lead you in the wilderness and send water in the desert, speaking about provision. So that whole thing about increasing our habitation, positioning ourselves to be used of God, already started, because this studio that we're doing this interview in is our new studio. We didn't have a studio. And we found this facility before in May. On the 5th of May, we walked in here. I signed the lease for it. We didn't have the finances or anything to build the studio. We just had an empty warehouse. But my wife and I stepped over the portal, the door, in faith and said, Lord, we claim this place for your glory, to do your work. Whatever you want us to do, God, we consecrate this place to do your work. And just like that, God provided. From the day we moved in here, God provided finances. We're not finished yet, but every step of the way, God has been providing. We're almost 2/3 done with the studio now. And we believe God is going to provide for everything else we need here, including the radio recording, all of that. And when he said that, God showed me that we're positioned with this television radio studio, that God has now positioned us internationally.
Yes.
That just happened a few days ago. We're standing in this church, and God is showing me, he brought me back to Washington, where the vision started, where God gave me the vision to come back home and start this ministry. And God brought me back to Washington for a realignment, for repositioning, for newer things, for greater things. And this pastor says this to me.
Yeah.
And so I get the sense that God took me there to say, 7 years.
Yes.
I'm repositioning you for the next 7 years. And the next 7 years is going to be greater and more influential. You are going to do greater things through my spirit. I'm going to use this ministry. I don't know what's coming. I can sense, I've got an idea, but I know that God is going to use us in much greater measure as a ministry, using the television and the radio and the media aspect of it as well, to protect and defend the family, to inform and educate and equip the Church of Jesus Christ in this nation, to use the media strategically to take back what the liberal media has stolen, and take back the media space for the glory of God. All of that is beginning to happen. So I feel like we're standing at the doorstep, at the precipice of something new and greater that's going to happen. Great expectation, a lot of confirmation from people, even emails and messages I get from people in this ministry are more or less saying the same thing. So there's a lot of expectation.
Great. Now, Errol, I am a woman of faith, and I am a person who has big dreams and who trusts God, but I'm also a realist. So I do believe media can change culture. We've seen that. I mean, I work in media, so I'm very passionate about the influence of media. But I also know that, for example, when it comes to the issues of the family, as much as the media can be transformed, as much as the minds of the masses can be transformed, in countries that are developing nations, like you look at Rwanda, Uganda, you look at South Africa even, when you've got the UN imposing policies and sort of terms and conditions that come along with the IMF and the World Bank, how do we actually defend ourselves against those criteria? Because as much as the country and the citizens might not support, for example, homosexual marriage or certain infringement of religious freedom, if you've got overseas laws that are linked financially imposing on you, what defense do we have as a nation against this?
I think, and we're going to go to a break shortly, but I want to talk about what happened at the United States Supreme Court and what happened at the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. Two international events that shows us that this fight for family and the efforts that we are making to defend it actually pays off. And especially when we get the information out, we get the broader body of Christ involved to firstly pray and then to act, we see results.
Yeah.
And these two events that are incredibly important events for religious freedom and for the family. It shows that when we have the information and we act and we pray, that God gives us the victory. And we want to talk about that because in the March for Marriage, it was so incredible. We marched to the United States Supreme Court with about 5,000 Christians. And we went right in front of the Supreme Court and we knelt down and we prayed. And so there was a whole lot of praying. People were praying in tongues and just a whole concert and chorus of prayer. There were gay activists standing on the opposite side trying to block the people from coming there and calling them bigots and all of that. They prayed for them as well, which is great. And we prayed over the United States Supreme Court. And incredibly, that I was part of that. Myself and Arlene were part of that, kneeling there and praying and interceding and asking God for wisdom for the justices that make important decisions in that institution. A week later, when we come back to South Africa, there's a ruling by the US Supreme Court ruling in favor of religious freedom. So we're going to go to a break, but when we come back, I want to talk about that ruling and what happened at the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, because both of it is going to have huge implications on religious freedom and on the family.
Right. Well, don't go away. We'll see you in a second. Welcome back to the show, and for those of you who've maybe just tuned in, we are chatting to Errol Naidu. Many of you know him as the executive producer of Watchman on the Wall, but Errol's main job is actually as the director and founder of Family Policy Institute, where he, together with his team, stand up for defending the family and biblical principles and religious freedom in society. And just before we went to break, Errol was telling me about some very exciting developments in the Supreme Court in America, and also with the United Nations Council. So Errol, I've been dying to know. We've had a break. Tell me, what happened in America? And it's nice to hear good news. So let's expand it a little bit.
A major victory for religious freedom. That's what happened. It's a case that's been going on for a while. There are many cases where Christian-owned family businesses in America is being compelled by the Obama administration. They passed this health mandate, called the Affordable Care Act, which compels Christian business from dispensing abortion-inducing drugs to their staff. Now, obviously, if you're a Christian and you own a business and government's telling you, give your staff drugs that's going to bring down their babies or cause abortions, that's a violation of your beliefs and your conscience. Obama administration said, we don't care about your beliefs and conscience, you just do it, because they're the most pro-abortion government in the United States in its history. And a company by the name of Hobby Lobby, that's Crafts, they've got about 500 stores all across America. The owner of that store, David Green, said, no ways, we're not going to do it. So they began to impose heavy penalties on them, millions of dollars, fining them every day for disobeying this imposition on their faith. And so Hobby Lobby and a wood specialty company called Costanego or something, they got together and they fought this case, and they fought it all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And we thank God for the courage of these people. They obviously have the finances to take it all the way, but for all Christians across the world, we thank God for Hobby Lobby and the wood specialty company for standing their ground and say, we cannot do this. We cannot believe, we cannot violate our own deeply held religious beliefs and convictions. And so the United States Supreme Court agreed with him.
Yeah.
And they said,
which was a shock. People weren't expecting that, because obviously they're so liberal, and previous precedents, legally speaking, have gone against Christians. So that was a great victory.
Absolutely. And it shocked the Obama administration. The liberal media went into overdrive when that ruling was made. And basically what it says is that family-owned business, for-profit businesses, cannot be compelled by government to violate their own beliefs. It's a burden on religious people to give abortion drugs, to dispense abortion drugs to their staff when it violates their belief system. So that was a huge victory, because obviously it has implications for all kinds of other things.
Yes.
the liberal media went out with lies and distortions of the facts, saying that, women's rights and women that want to get drugs and all of that now, they cannot do that. Of course, that's a lie. Women can get abortion drugs wherever they want to. They're free to do that. It's just not forcing Christian business owners to violate their conscience and give it to them.
Exactly.
And so that was the first one, the religious freedom ruling by the US Supreme Court, which we hope is going to happen here. And why it's so important to South Africa? Because currently in South Africa, a number of Christian family-owned businesses, guest houses, wedding-owned venues, are being investigated by the South African Human Rights Commission for declining to host same-sex ceremonies in their privately owned businesses.
Yeah.
And the Human Rights Commission are telling them that you can't hold that view. Even if you're a Christian, you have to violate your religious beliefs and convictions, because we regard that as discrimination, unfair discrimination. And these businesses are saying, no, we're not discriminating. It's not unfair discrimination. It's unfair discrimination against us if you force us to violate our convictions and beliefs. What about religious freedom? What about...
Particularly because also, sorry to interrupt you, but I mean, there are hundreds of guest houses and there's choice. So it's very frustrating when one sees that taking place, because it's almost like a targeted agenda.
Yes. I think that's what a lot of the Christian business owners are beginning to believe, because more and more of them are being hauled into court. There was a couple from Wolseley that's been hauled into the Belleville Equality Court. But the magistrate referred it to conciliation and arbitration before it comes to court. And he says, I think even the judge made the point that we need a balance of rights here.
Yeah.
We can't violate one person's rights by giving another person rights. We have to say homosexual citizens have rights and we need to protect their rights, but so do Christians. And we need to uphold and protect their rights. How do we do that? It has to be a balance. And so that's what the conciliation and mediation is all about. And then there's the pastor that was hauled into the High Court because he made some statements. And so there's a whole lot of things happening. So this ruling, I believe, is very important, because at some point in South Africa, a Christian business owner is going to have to fight his case all the way to the Constitutional Court, because there has been no ruling in South Africa on this matter. And what is happening is, if a case comes before a judge, and it's a liberal judge, he will rule against the Christians and say, well, you just have to suppress or violate your beliefs and your rights and do what we tell you to do, or we'll impose fines on you or put you in jail. But we need a ruling in South Africa, in our Constitutional Court, where the court must make a ruling between the rights of homosexuals, citizens, and the rights of Christians to freely practice their beliefs and their convictions.
Yeah.
So that's the one case. The second one is the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. Very important in the documentation that is developed by this institution. It implicates all the member nations of the United Nations, of which South Africa is one of them.
Yeah.
And if sexual rights activists get the kind of language in those documents that they want to get, the implications for the family is catastrophic. And pro-family organizations, the organizations I'm working with, did a tremendous job of getting the information. Again, it was just information, getting it out to people, helping them understand that if we don't get this resolution, this Protect the Family resolution as it's being called, if we don't get it into this United Nations documents, the implications for family across the world would be dire. And thank God they were successful in getting this family protection resolution adopted at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva a couple of weeks ago. And what it says actually is that, this is what it says. It says the natural family is the fundamental group unit of society and is therefore entitled to protection from society and the state. Very important language.
Yeah.
That the state, the burden, the responsibility, obligation is on the state to protect the natural family. Why? It goes on to say because the natural family, the unique role of the natural family is to raise, nurture, and protect children, the future generations of that nation.
Yeah, which is obvious to you and I.
It's obvious to you and I, and to lots of other people out there, but to the sexual rights activists, they're trying to undermine that.
Yeah.
And so this language recognizes that, and it's so critically important. I can't overemphasize it. That we had to get this language in there, that the natural family, the natural family being the mother, the father, the children. Only a mom and a dad can make children.
Yeah.
The children need a mother and a father for their well-being, emotional well-being. All the research shows that the two-parent biological family is the best unit for raising children, the best environment for raising strong, healthy, emotionally stable children. And we need more of that. And so it's a huge victory. There's been a lot of attacks. Surprisingly, the Democratic Alliance came out and attacked the resolution, the pro-family resolution, because it didn't recognize what they call inclusive families.
Yeah, I must be honest, that doesn't actually surprise me, because when you look, you know, one thing I find very frustrating, we work in media, we are sort of well read on the issue, so we have some background knowledge, but I find it interesting when you speak to Christians who, whether it's in their voting and political support, whether it's in social support, whatever the case may be, they don't look at the history of an organization and the precedents that they've set in decisions they've made, and then they almost get shocked that the person then goes and stands against biblical values. We look at Obama, for example, before he was elected as president years ago. Those of us who just did a little bit of research knew that his history in the Senate was showing that, as a senator, was showing that he had an aggressive anti-family outlook and worldview. And yet, so many Christians supported him, voted him into power, and then got shocked when he wanted to be pro-gay marriage, pro-abortion. And you almost say, well, if you guys just looked at the background, you'd see it. And so, likewise in South Africa, we as citizens also have to be well-informed. And as you said, that's part of the role that FPI plays, is to actually put out newsletters, to call for marches, to work on documents and resolutions. Because even our own opposition parties and our own governmental organizations are working against us.
Absolutely. So that's why the information is key. And that's why we believe what God is doing with Family Policy Institute now, repositioning us, is giving us this wonderful facility, the television and radio studio. So we want to begin to produce radio program that will help people understand, firstly, what the threats are against marriage, against family, and against religious freedoms, because the attack against religious freedom is escalating. And why is that? Because Christians are at the forefront of the battle for marriage and family. And the anti-family activists have realized that if we can shut down the Christians, if we can shut down their voice and what they do by using all kinds of excuses and dragging them to court and accusing them of all kinds of things, if we shut down the religious debate, then we can win this battle on marriage and family.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. So the most important thing now is to fight to maintain our religious freedoms in South Africa and worldwide. And that Supreme Court ruling helped us do that.
Yeah.
It set a precedent, a very important precedent. And of course, getting the language, the pro-family language in the United Nations resolution is very important as well, for marriage, for family, because that wording that the natural family is the fundamental group unit of society has become so important, because a lot of other things can come out of that.
You mentioned a very good point there, that for us it's key that we get involved in protecting religious freedom. And you know, if I drill it back down to really at a grassroots level, for husbands and wives sitting at home, for single people sitting at home, how that affects you is your family might be okay, you might be fine as a Christian, but the problem is that there's a societal influence. So even if your little unit lives by biblical values, if your neighbors don't, that's going to influence your life.
Right.
When your kids go to school, when my children one day go to school, I need to fight for that future society because they're going to be affected by the culture at that time. And so as Christians, we've constantly got to have that. That is actually how the second commandment gets lived out, of loving your neighbor.
That's right.
Because if you love your neighbor as you love yourself, as myself, I want to protect my family. I want to ensure that there's longevity for them and the values and the culture of society protects them. I've got to love my neighbor to do that, which means for their sake, I have to fight for those religious freedoms and be involved. And that's where I think the body of Christ is moving in these end times that we live in, through organizations like yourself, through Christian media like Joy, is educating Christians with a biblical worldview, because that biblical worldview affects what you do on the ground.
That's
and
right.
you cannot divorce what you see going on in world affairs. You cannot divorce what you see in the legislation and say, oh, but you know, that's for the government people, or that's politics, I'm not interested. Because it affects you in your home, with your tax-paying money, the schools your kids go to. It's got that long-term effect.
Absolutely. And you see, you're not only protecting your family, God calls you to protect other families, to fight for families in general. We don't just look after ourselves. The Christian life is a sacrificial life.
Yeah.
And God has commanded us to, Jesus commanded us to go and make disciples of all nations. How do we do that? By speaking the truth, by teaching them the truth. And a fundamental truth is that marriage is of God. It's a man and a woman for life. That family is the building block of society. That is a fundamental truth. You cannot change that. People are trying to. Governments are trying to change that. But it's God's truth that will remain forever. And it's the Christian's responsibility to articulate that truth. And to explain to people why marriage and family is important. We're just not fighting for it because, you know, that's our view and we're stuck on our view. No. It benefits all of society. And what happens when marriages break down, like we're seeing in South Africa, and when families break down, all of society suffers.
Yeah.
Everybody is hurt by the breakdown of family because drug addiction, alcohol abuse, prostitution, gangsterism, antisocial behavior, school dropouts, teen pregnancies, all of these issues, crime, violence, can be traced back to the breakdown of the family. So if we know that and we want to restore and heal our society, we've got to start where God started, with marriages, restoring marriage between a man and a woman, and restoring the family, get it back to the ideal that God has given us.
Yeah.
We recognize there are single parent families, and many women doing an outstanding job of raising their children, and we pray for them, and we congratulate them for just doing what they do.
Yeah.
But regardless of how well a woman does in raising a single parent family, she still cannot be a father to her children. And all the research shows us that children need a father. They need a father. Fatherhood is so important, and the absence of fathering in our nation is catastrophic to many young people, to our society in general. And so Family Policy Institute, and I'm glad I could do this report back with you, Jackie,
Yes.
is that we believe that God has placed us very strategically in South Africa to promote His truth through the media, through the airwaves, working with your wonderful magazine, Joy and Jeug, playing such a key role in getting the truth out, the biblical Christian worldview of life, of marriage, of family.
Wonderful. So just to close off the show tonight, Errol, would you give us some practical ways that we can get involved? I know that you have a newsletter we can subscribe to. I know that you have an extensive speaking engagement at various churches, and churches can invite you to come and speak.
That's right.
And then also, you know, obviously through the show we can catch up. But is there another way? Can we pray for Family Policy? Can we donate? How can we get involved in helping with this?
There's all of those things. It's prayer. Most important, I always say to people, nothing gets done without prayer. We prayed this ministry into existence. Every victory we had was because of prayer. And so we see how important prayer is. You've got to pray. You've got to intercede for every little thing. Pray for your families. Pray for your children. Pray for your marriages. All the time, the devil is out there like a roaring lion, seeking whom he can devour. So be aware of that prayer is essential. And then, of course, people can subscribe to our newsletter because we share the vital information. They can go to familypolicyinstitute.com and get that information there. Subscribe to our newsletter weekly. Watch the show, Watchman on the Wall, because we're the only current affairs program from a biblical Christian perspective, giving you the other side. You see, our tagline is truth has no agenda.
Yeah.
We have no agenda. All we want to do is articulate the truth, tell people what is really happening and what they can do about it. And of course, people can support us financially. Go to our website there. We need money to do this ministry, to keep this program on the air and do the work we're doing, so people can do that as well. So.
Wonderful. Great. Well, I can certainly say that tonight has been very interesting for me, very positive as well, because sometimes you read the media and the news and you think, oh, this battle is just coming and the tide is just against us. But we know that when we pray, when we ask the Lord to do things according to His will and His name, that it will be done for us, and that even those mountains that we could not even see being moved will be cast into the sea. And that is just such an encouragement to get this feedback. So, Errol, and to all of the team around here as well, thank you so much for what you're doing for our nation. I know that those of us who are plugged into FPI, we appreciate you, we appreciate what you guys do, but even future generations will rise up and call us blessed because of what you've done, and they will be grateful. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie.
And thank you for watching, and God bless you, and as Errol likes to say, keep standing.
Amen. Next up, I speak to Taryn Hodgson of Africa Christian Action about a recent report from the South African Human Rights Commission regarding Mavericks Strip Club. I'm speaking to Taryn Hodgson, the National and International Director of Africa Christian Action, based here in Cape Town. And Taryn, you've put a report out summarizing the violations at Mavericks. It's a report by the South African Human Rights Commission. And you've summarized this quite succinctly, and we thank you for that. But what are the major issues that arose out of this Human Rights Commission report?
Yes, well, the Mavericks took the Department of Home Affairs to court over the refusal to grant certain corporate visas to them, which is what they use to actually traffic women into South Africa, we believe. And then out of this court case, some of the suspicions of trafficking, such as the employment conditions and the living conditions of the women, came out. And so Judge Desire actually ordered the Human Rights Commission to do an investigation into these suspected human rights violations back in 2012, and so now the Human Rights Commission have produced a report, and then I just had a look through all these different things that are coming out in the report, and to me it seems clear that this report is confirming some of our suspicions of human rights violations at Mavericks.
So what are the main issues that have emerged from this Human Rights Commission report?
Well, one of the main things is the suspicions of trafficking, and a clear point that, or evidence that I think really points to human trafficking, is the fact that the National Anti-Trafficking Hotline, which is manned by Annex, they received a call from a Mavericks dancer in 2011 who felt very threatened and by a Russian man who was employed by Mavericks to drop the dancers off back at home after being at the club. And yeah, so she felt really threatened, but, you know, again, probably because of intimidation, she's really scared. She asked them not to follow it up. But that's just one very important insight.
It is an indication, because a lot of these women are threatened, their travel documents are held, they're in a foreign country, so there's not much they can do. So that's why a lot of these violations go unreported and undetected.
Yes, because there's so much control and intimidation involved. There's, you know, even blackmail. They possibly even feel that their families back home in Eastern Europe could be threatened. they're very scared to speak out about these issues. So whilst, you know, the report can't give any conclusive evidence about trafficking, piecing together all the evidence about various violations, we can definitely see that there's a lot of control, coercion, intimidation, and exploitation involved.
Which are not part of a normal legal business in South Africa.
No, and one really can't call this work at all, because there's exploitation involved. This is not according to, you know, the dignity of women. They are forced to strip and dance, and one of the things that even came out in the report is that they even have to dance while they're menstruating. So that's a clear violation of their dignity.
Yeah.
But other important issues that have come out are how Mavericks dancers have to pay 2,000 Rand a week in order to work at Mavericks. Now, in what organization do you pay to work there? And anti-trafficking organizations believe that this is what forces these Mavericks dancers to resort to prostitution in order to be able to pay this fee, and also they're also forced to pay back their flight costs and pay a fee even to the immigration agents which arranged their visas to get into South Africa. So there's a lot of suspicious things going on here.
But isn't that the modus operandi of traffickers, of human traffickers, is that they promise young women jobs in a particular country, bring them over, and once they're here, they keep their documents, their travel documents, and then they force them to work to pay back their travel costs and their accommodations and all of that. So as these women then prostitute themselves, they've got this huge bill that is climbing with the people that brought them over. They never get out of debt, so they have to keep on working as prostitutes to pay back that debt. So, you know, with the Mavericks thing, apparently, you know, one would think that they're employed by the club as exotic dancers, but yet they have to pay 2,000 Rand a month to dance there. And so do you know what Mavericks pays them for dancing?
Well, they have to pay it's actually 2,000 Rand a week to work there.
Okay,
and in fact, another very interesting thing that came out, that again, it can't be proved that prostitution is taking place. Mavericks would deny this, the dancers deny this, but it's very suspicious. Every time they leave the club early with a patron of the club, they have to pay a fine to Mavericks. And this seems to make Mavericks somewhat of a pimp. You know, when they've got to pay the patron to leave the club early, you know, what are they going to do with those patrons?
And why are they paying just to leave early with a client? So, and all of this is perfectly legal under South African law?
No, this is actually a crime. You know, organizations such as Sweat would want to focus on the fact that labor law, there's various labor law violations, there's no such thing as employment contracts, and these are all important things that could at least, you know, could hamper Mavericks in some way. But we need to remember that according to the Sexual Offences Act, prostitution is still a crime, and even lap dancing is a crime. And so what Mavericks is doing is exploitation. These women are not working there. And the report does recommend that the police do further investigations into these criminal aspects. And I really hope that the police will do further investigations, especially to prove that prostitution is taking place on the premises and that dancers are engaging in prostitution off the premises as well. And that, you know, there's a lot of violations of immigration law as well in terms of...
But are clubs like Mavericks properly monitored by the authorities? Because I've seen reports that said, like, for example, Mavericks in Cape Town is right next to a police station, a major police station in Cape Town, and that top police officials frequent Mavericks and are entertained and dined and wined. And so if the police officials and high-ranking government officials are visiting clubs like Mavericks, what are the chances of them actually properly investigating this for trafficking and abuses and exploitation of women?
Yes, well, it is concerning that there could be high-up government officials who frequent these clubs. But we do have the Hawks, and the Hawks are meant to investigate incidences of trafficking. And I did meet a nice man from the Hawks the other day, and we do hope that they will work together with the police to do further investigations.
Look, there's been investigations by the media of Mavericks. I can remember about 2 years ago. There were stories regularly in the media about violations, about Mavericks bringing Eastern European women into this country on missionary.
Yes, there was one of the visas. One of these immigration agents had put missionary,
Christian missionary.
Totally ridiculous.
And they're bringing exotic dances as Christian missionaries in here. And of course, there was a report in the paper also that said, once the women come here and they work at Mavericks for a while and then they disappear and then the club doesn't know where they are. But they're responsible for bringing them into the country. So there's all kinds of issues with that. But what I did notice is when Mavericks started advertising in these newspapers, big color adverts, those investigations dried up, disappeared. Did you notice that?
Yes, in fact, there was another advert in one of the Cape Town newspapers very recently, and this is shameful. They, with such suspected human rights violations and a report confirming these violations from the Human Rights Commission, we really need to emphasize to these Cape Town newspapers that you cannot advertise a business that's involved in criminal activities.
Yeah, and I think one of the other major challenges is that the anti-trafficking bill, the prevention and combating of trafficking in persons bill, although it was signed into law by President Jacob Zuma in December last year, 2013, it hasn't been implemented yet. The Justice Department hasn't implemented the legislation properly. And so we have a great piece of legislation, comprehensive piece of legislation, but it's not been implemented. And so the tools for fighting this is not in the hands of the authorities yet. And so the next thing we have to do, and I interviewed the Deputy Minister of Justice, John Jeffrey, on the show about when they're going to implement that legislation. He said about May of this year, 2014, is now July, and it still hasn't been implemented. So of course, all of these things are contributing to the trafficking, the exploitation, and the abuse of women.
Yes, the report does acknowledge that the Trafficking in Persons Bill needs to now be implemented, and this hopefully will give the Hawks and the police more
teeth. There's been enough suspicions emerging in the media, police investigations.
Yeah, teasers a big one in Joburg. There's
correct.
A lot of media reports also that brought out these suspicions of trafficking.
Yeah, and people that work on the ground to help rescue women out of trafficking and prostitution situations, they have told me personally that women are being trafficked and abused and exploited in those clubs. So there's enough evidence there, but I think the authorities haven't done a good enough job of properly investigating this issue. Mavericks advertises a lot. We were at the opening of Parliament, and an aircraft was flying above Parliament with a banner advertising Mavericks. So the Mavericks management puts a lot of money into advertising and promoting these services. They apparently have a lot of money to do that. And if you couple that with just what has been written about this club and its connections to exploitation and trafficking, I think a lot more should have been done. Do you think the Human Rights Commission report comprehensively deals with the situation at Mavericks?
I I think they might have beat around the bush a bit on the trafficking issue, and maybe not emphasized enough that what's probably happening at Mavericks is prostitution, and that is a crime. So that, you know, it's pointless to go and do investigations by the Department of Labor into the labor law violations when this is not what they're doing. There's not work. It's exploitation, and it's a crime. So what really should happen is that the police should shut down Mavericks because of their criminal activities that they're doing there.
Yeah, so hopefully, Taryn, like Africa Christian Action Family Policy Institute, we're also monitoring these organizations that exploit women, the trafficking, prostitution, and we'll continue to monitor that and bring it to the attention of our viewers, and also challenge our authorities, the police, our government, to step up the fight against the abuse of women and children, and also sexual exploitation and trafficking. So Taryn, thank you for coming into the studio and giving us this update. We support your work. We thank you for the work you're doing. And may God bless you as you continue exposing these violations of law.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your program, Errol, and I trust that God will continue to bless Family Policy Institute.
Thank you.
That's our show for tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. Please remember to go to our website, familypolicyinstitute.com, click on the subscribe button and fill in your information. Once you submit that, you will receive our weekly newsletter, Watchman on the Wall. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Remember, the latest edition of Joy magazine is available at retail stores across the country. Make sure you get your copy. Thank you for joining us tonight. God bless you, and remember to keep standing.